The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Margaret Thompson adjusted her black uniform and checked her watch. As the head of the Queen's personal security detail, she had served the royal family for over 20 years. Today felt different, though. The air carried a heaviness that seemed to press down on everyone within the castle walls. Queen Elizabeth had passed away peacefully just 3 days ago, and the entire nation was in mourning. Margaret had been one of the last people to see Her Majesty alive, standing guard outside her private chambers as the doctors made their final visits. The Queen had always treated Margaret with kindness and respect, something that made her current duty even more meaningful. The castle buzzed with activity as staff members prepared for the upcoming funeral arrangements. Flowers arrived by the truckload, dignitaries called every hour, and security protocols had been elevated to the highest level. Margaret coordinated with her team of 12 guards, ensuring that every entrance and exit remained secure during this vulnerable time. Charles, now King Charles III, had arrived the previous evening with his wife Camilla. Margaret noticed immediately how different the atmosphere became when they entered the castle. While Charles moved with the weight of his new responsibilities, speaking quietly with advisors and family members, Camilla seemed restless and distracted. Margaret first observed unusual behavior when she noticed Camilla wandering through the castle corridors late at night. At first, she assumed the new queen consort was simply grieving or unable to sleep. Many people processed loss differently, and Margaret had seen all kinds of reactions during her years of service. However, something about Camilla's movements caught her attention. Instead of walking aimlessly like someone lost in thought, she moved with purpose. She stopped at specific doors, peered into certain rooms, and seemed to be taking mental notes of her surroundings. Margaret made a note to keep closer watch, though she tried to give Camilla the benefit of the doubt. The next morning brought more concerning behavior. Margaret was stationed near the Queen's private study when she saw Camilla enter with her personal assistant, Sarah. They spent nearly an hour inside, and Margaret could hear the sound of drawers being opened and papers being shuffled. When they emerged, both women carried small boxes and appeared to be discussing something in hushed tones. Margaret's training kicked in. Her job was to protect not just the physical safety of the royal family, but also their property and privacy. She approached Camilla respectfully, asking if everything was all right and if she needed any assistance. Camilla seemed startled and quickly explained that she was simply organizing some of the Queen's personal papers to help Charles during this difficult time. The explanation seemed reasonable enough, but Margaret's instincts told her something wasn't quite right. She had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth for years and knew that the late monarch was extremely particular about her personal belongings. She had specific instructions about what should happen to various items after her death, and these instructions were well documented and legally binding. Margaret decided to discreetly check with the castle's head administrator about the proper procedures for handling the Queen's personal effects. What she learned made her stomach drop. According to royal protocol and the Queen's own written wishes, no one was supposed to touch or move any of her personal belongings until after the funeral. Everything needed to be catalogued by official estate managers and distributed according to her detailed will. Armed with this information, Margaret knew she had to act carefully. Accusing the new queen consort of wrongdoing without solid proof could end her career and cause a massive scandal during an already difficult time. She decided to increase surveillance around the Queen's private quarters and document any unusual activity. Her vigilance paid off when she witnessed Camilla's next visit to the Queen's chambers. This time, Camilla brought her daughter Laura and son Tom with her. Margaret watched from a discreet distance as the three of them spent over 2 hours in the room, clearly going through personal items. She could see them examining jewelry, looking through photo albums, and handling various precious objects that had belonged to the late Queen. Margaret's heart raced as she realized the severity of what she was witnessing. This wasn't grief or innocent organizing. This looked like systematic searching and possibly taking items that weren't legally theirs to claim. She knew she had to gather more evidence before making any accusations, but she also felt a deep responsibility to protect the Queen's memory and wishes. She quietly contacted her supervisor and requested permission to set up additional security cameras in the corridors leading to the Queen's private areas. Her request was approved without question, given the sensitive nature of the period following the monarch's death. Within hours, discrete cameras were installed that would capture any future activity. Margaret also began keeping a detailed log of everyone who entered and exited the Queen's private quarters. She noted the times, duration of visits, and any items she observed being carried in or out. Her military training and attention to detail served her well as she built what she hoped would be a comprehensive record of events. The pressure of the situation weighed heavily on Margaret's shoulders. She had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, but now she found herself in the unprecedented position of potentially protecting the family from one of its own members. She knew that whatever action she took could have far-reaching consequences not just for her career, but for the entire royal family during their time of grief. As evening approached, Margaret stationed herself strategically where she could monitor the Queen's quarters while appearing to conduct her normal patrol duties. She had a feeling that tonight would bring more revelations, and she wanted to be ready to document whatever happened next. The weight of her responsibility felt heavier than ever as she prepared for what might be a long night of surveillance. Margaret understood that she might be the only person standing between the late Queen's wishes and those who would exploit this vulnerable moment for personal gain. Margaret didn't have to wait long for her suspicions to be confirmed. At exactly 11:30 that night, she spotted movement near the Queen's private chambers. Through the newly installed security cameras, she watched as Camilla approached the doors with a small group that included her son Tom and her personal secretary Sarah. What shocked Margaret most was seeing them use a key to enter the room. How had they obtained access to the Queen's private quarters? These rooms were supposed to be sealed and off-limits until the official estate proceedings began. Margaret's pulse quickened as she realized this meant someone in a position of authority had either given them permission or they had taken the key without authorization. Through her monitoring equipment, Margaret observed the group systematically going through the Queen's personal collection. They examined jewelry boxes, opened private safes, and carefully sorted through documents that had been stored in the late monarch's personal desk. The scene looked more like a planned operation than grieving family members handling personal effects. Margaret noticed that they had brought several empty bags and boxes with them. As the hours passed, she watched these containers being filled with items from the Queen's collection. They seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, suggesting this wasn't their first unauthorized visit to the chambers. The most disturbing moment came when Margaret saw Tom holding up what appeared to be the Queen's personal jewelry collection. She recognized several pieces that the Queen had worn frequently during public appearances. These weren't just sentimental items. They were historically significant pieces that belonged to the Crown Estate and the British people. Margaret made the difficult decision to wake her supervisor, Commander James Wilson. She knew that disturbing him at this hour would require serious justification. But what she was witnessing could not wait until morning. Commander Wilson had served the royal family even longer than Margaret, and would understand the gravity of the situation. When Commander Wilson arrived at the security office 20 minutes later, Margaret showed him the live footage from the cameras. His face grew increasingly grim as he watched the unauthorized activity taking place in the Queen's chambers. He immediately understood the legal and constitutional implications of what they were witnessing. Together, they documented everything they saw, taking screenshots and making detailed notes about each item being handled or removed. Commander Wilson's years of experience had taught him the importance of building an airtight case before taking action against anyone in the royal family, especially during such a sensitive time. The operation in the Queen's chambers continued until nearly 3 in the morning. By the time Camilla and her companions finally left, they had removed several boxes worth of items. Margaret and Commander Wilson had documented everything, but now faced the challenging question of how to proceed. Commander Wilson made the decision to immediately contact the Queen's personal attorney and the head of the royal household. These were the only people with the authority to address such a serious breach of protocol and law. Both officials were awakened and briefed on the situation, and both expressed shock and concern at what had been discovered. The Queen's attorney, Sir David Richardson, arrived at the castle within 2 hours. He reviewed the security footage and Margaret's detailed logs with growing alarm. As someone who had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth to create her final wishes and estate plans, he knew exactly which items were being unlawfully removed and their significance. Sir David explained to Margaret and Commander Wilson that what they had witnessed wasn't just a breach of royal protocol, it was potentially criminal behavior. The items being taken included pieces specifically mentioned in the Queen's will that were designated for particular family members or charitable organizations. By removing them before the official estate process, Camilla was potentially depriving the rightful inheritors of their legal property. The attorney also revealed something that made the situation even more serious. The Queen had expressed specific concerns about certain family members potentially trying to claim items that weren't rightfully theirs. She had even included special provisions in her will to prevent such situations, demonstrating that she had anticipated this kind of problem. With legal backing now secured, Commander Wilson and Sir David developed a plan to address the situation. They would need to confront Camilla directly, but they would do so with proper documentation and legal authority. The goal was to recover the unlawfully taken items and prevent any further unauthorized access to the Queen's personal effects. Margaret was chosen to lead the confrontation because she had witnessed the events firsthand and had built the most comprehensive documentation of what had occurred. She felt the weight of responsibility as she prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of her career. The plan was to approach Camilla the following morning during breakfast, when she would be in a semi-public setting with other family members present. This would provide witnesses while also allowing her a chance to explain her actions and return the items voluntarily before the situation escalated further. Margaret spent the rest of the night reviewing her notes and preparing for the confrontation. She understood that she was about to challenge someone who was now technically her superior in the royal hierarchy, but she also knew that her ultimate loyalty was to the law and to the wishes of the late Queen. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, Margaret prepared herself for a conversation that could change everything. She had served the royal family faithfully for 2 decades, but now she found herself in the position of enforcing the law against one of its members. The irony wasn't lost on her, but her sense of duty remained clear. Commander Wilson reminded her that she had the full support of the security team and the legal authority to act. Whatever happened next, Margaret knew she was doing the right thing by protecting the legacy and final wishes of the Queen she had served so faithfully for so many years. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle's breakfast room as Margaret approached the most challenging moment of her career. She had positioned herself strategically near the entrance, waiting for the right moment to approach Camilla. Her heart pounded as she reviewed the documented evidence one final time. Camilla entered the breakfast room at 8:30, accompanied by her children, Tom and Laura. They appeared relaxed and confident, showing no signs of concern about their nighttime activities. Margaret noticed that Camilla was wearing a brooch that she didn't recognize from previous public appearances, a piece that suspiciously matched one of the items she had seen being examined in the security footage. Margaret waited until Camilla had settled at her table before approaching. She walked with the measured confidence that 20 years of royal service had taught her, carrying a formal folder containing the documentation of the previous night's events. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her posture straight, and her expression professionally neutral. "Your Majesty," Margaret said, using the formal address as she stopped beside Camilla's table, "I need to speak with you about a matter of urgent importance regarding the late Queen's personal effects." Camilla looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting to be approached by security personnel during breakfast. Tom and Laura exchanged glances, and Margaret noticed a flash of concern cross Tom's face. This reaction confirmed her suspicions that they were aware their actions had been inappropriate. "I'm not sure what you mean," Camilla replied, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she had been developing since becoming Queen Consort. "I haven't been involved with any of Mother-in-law's personal belongings. That's being handled by the proper authorities." Margaret opened her folder and placed a series of printed photographs on the table. The images clearly showed Camilla, Tom, Laura, and Sarah entering and exiting the Queen's private chambers with boxes and bags. The timestamps were clearly visible, showing the late-night timeline of their unauthorized visits. "These photographs were taken by our security cameras over the past 2 days," Margaret explained calmly. "They show unauthorized access to Her late Majesty's sealed private chambers, as well as the removal of personal items that are protected under royal estate law." The breakfast room fell silent. Other family members at nearby tables began to notice the tense conversation, but Margaret kept her focus on Camilla's reaction. The new Queen Consort's face had gone pale, and she was staring at the photographs with obvious shock at being caught. Tom leaned forward to examine the images more closely. "These could be doctored," he said defensively. "Anyone can manipulate photos these days. This is clearly some kind of setup." Margaret had anticipated this response. She pulled out her phone and showed them a brief video clip from the security footage, clearly showing all three of them entering the Queen's chambers with empty boxes and leaving with full ones. The timestamp and clear image quality made any claims of manipulation impossible to sustain. The full video documentation has been reviewed by Sir David Richardson, the Queen's personal attorney, and by Commander Wilson, head of Castle Security. Margaret continued, "We have a complete record of your activities, including detailed inventories of items that were removed from the premises." Camilla's composure began to crack. She glanced around the breakfast room, clearly aware that their conversation was drawing attention from other family members. Princess Anne had stopped eating and was listening intently from a nearby table, her expression showing growing concern and disapproval. "Even if we did visit those rooms," Camilla said, lowering her voice, "we were simply trying to help organize things during this difficult time. Charles has been overwhelmed with his new responsibilities, and we thought we could assist with some of the personal matters." Margaret pulled out another document from her folder, copy of the official royal protocol regarding the handling of a deceased monarch's personal effects. She pointed to specific sections that clearly stated no one was authorized to enter or remove items from the sealed chambers until after the funeral and the beginning of formal estate proceedings. "Your Majesty, these protocols exist for legal reasons," Margaret explained. "The Queen's personal belongings are part of her estate and must be distributed according to her will. Removing items before this process violates both royal law and potentially criminal law." Laura spoke up for the first time, her voice shaking slightly. "We didn't take anything valuable. We were just looking at photo albums and personal papers, family things that belonged to us anyway." Margaret produced another set of photographs showing Tom examining what appeared to be significant jewelry pieces, including a diamond tiara and several necklaces that had been worn by the Queen during state occasions. These items were clearly not family photos or personal papers. "The items documented in our surveillance include pieces specifically mentioned in Her late Majesty's will," Margaret said firmly. "These pieces have designated recipients, and removing them interferes with the lawful distribution of the royal estate." By now, the conversation had drawn the attention of King Charles, who approached the table with a look of growing concern. Margaret felt a mix of relief and anxiety as she realized the new monarch was about to become directly involved in the situation. "What's happening here?" Charles asked, his voice carrying both authority and weariness. The past few days had clearly taken a toll on him, and this new crisis was the last thing he needed during his period of grief. Margaret turned to face the king and gave a respectful nod. "Your Majesty, we have discovered unauthorized access to your mother's private chambers and the removal of personal items that are protected under estate law. I have been documenting the situation and am required by protocol to address it immediately." Charles looked at the photographs spread across the table, then at his wife and stepchildren. Margaret could see the moment when understanding and disappointment crossed his face. He had clearly been unaware of their nighttime activities, and the revelation was obviously painful during an already difficult time. "Camilla," he said quietly, his voice containing a note of disbelief, "please tell me this isn't what it appears to be." The weight of the moment settled over the breakfast room as everyone waited for Camilla's response. Margaret knew that whatever happened next would determine not just the resolution of this immediate crisis, but potentially the future relationships within the royal family during this crucial transition period. Camilla's face flushed red as she realized there was no way to deny the overwhelming evidence Margaret had presented. The photographs, video footage, and witness testimony had created an undeniable case against her. She looked at Charles with desperation in her eyes, clearly hoping for support that wasn't coming. "Charles, you have to understand," Camilla began, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "I was thinking about our children's future. Laura and Tom deserve to have some connection to their step-grandmother. I thought maybe some small personal items would help them feel more included in the family legacy." Margaret watched as Charles processed this explanation. She could see the internal struggle on his face, torn between loyalty to his wife and his duty to uphold his mother's final wishes. The new king looked exhausted and betrayed, clearly unprepared for this kind of family crisis during his first week on the throne. Princess Anne, who had been listening from the nearby table, stood up and walked over to join the conversation. Her expression was stern and unforgiving as she examined the evidence Margaret had provided. As someone who had been extremely close to the Queen, Anne's reaction carried significant weight. "This is absolutely disgraceful," Anne said, her voice cutting through the morning air like ice. "Mother specifically planned for the distribution of her belongings. She spent months working with attorneys to ensure everything went to the right people and organizations. How dare you interfere with her final wishes?" Tom tried to defend their actions again. "We weren't stealing anything. We were just looking at things that might have sentimental value for our family. Camilla is part of this family now, and so are we." Anne's response was swift and sharp. "Being part of this family means respecting its traditions and laws, not breaking into sealed rooms and taking whatever you please. Mother's belongings don't belong to whoever can grab them first." Margaret stepped forward to address the growing tension in the room. She understood that her role wasn't to moderate family disputes, but to ensure the law was followed and the Queen's estate was protected. She needed to bring the focus back to the practical matters at hand. "Your Majesty," she said, addressing Charles directly, "Sir David Richardson is standing by to meet with you about the legal implications of this situation. The items that were removed need to be returned immediately to prevent any criminal charges from being filed." This mention of potential criminal charges sent a shock through the room. Camilla's eyes widened with fear as she realized the situation was far more serious than she had initially understood. The possibility of criminal prosecution would create a scandal that could damage the entire royal family during their most vulnerable period. Charles finally found his voice, though it was heavy with disappointment. "Camilla, you need to return everything immediately. This cannot continue, and it cannot happen again. Mother's wishes will be respected completely, without any interference or exceptions." "But Charles," Camilla protested, "surely you can understand that as your wife. I should have some say in how your mother's belongings are handled. We're supposed to be partners in everything now." Margaret saw Anne's face darken at this comment. The suggestion that Camilla should have authority over the Queen's estate simply because she had married Charles showed a fundamental misunderstanding of royal law and tradition. "The Queen's will is a legal document," Margaret interjected respectfully. "Personal relationships don't override legal obligations. The estate must be distributed exactly as Her late Majesty specified, and any interference could void parts of the will or result in legal action." Commander Wilson appeared at Margaret's shoulder, having been monitoring the situation from a distance. His presence added official weight to Margaret's statements and showed that the security team was united in their position. He carried additional documentation that Margaret had requested. "Your Majesty," Commander Wilson addressed Charles, "we have a complete inventory of items that were removed from the sealed chambers. We can provide this list to help ensure everything is returned to its proper location." Charles took the inventory list and scanned through it quickly. Margaret could see his expression growing more troubled as he read the detailed list of items that had been taken. Many were pieces she recognized as having significant historical and monetary value, far beyond simple sentimental keepsakes. "Some of these items," Charles said quietly, "were specifically mentioned in Mother's conversations with me. She had very particular plans for where they should go." He looked up at Camilla with a mixture of hurt and anger. "How could you take these things without even asking me?" Camilla's composure finally broke completely. She began crying, though Margaret suspected the tears were more from being caught than from genuine remorse. "I just wanted to feel like I belonged," she sobbed. "I've always felt like an outsider in this family, and I thought having some connection to your mother's memory would help." Laura and Tom both looked uncomfortable as their mother's emotional display attracted more attention from other family members in the breakfast room. Several staff members had also noticed the commotion and were trying to appear busy while clearly listening to the conversation. Princess Anne's response was unsympathetic. "Mother was always gracious to you, Camilla. She accepted your marriage to Charles and welcomed you into family events. But being welcome doesn't give you the right to help yourself to her personal belongings." Margaret realized this was the moment when she needed to take control of the situation before it escalated further. The emotional drama between family members was understandable, but her responsibility was to ensure the legal issues were addressed properly. "Your Majesty," she said, addressing Charles again, "we need to resolve the practical matters immediately. The funeral arrangements are already complex. and this situation needs to be settled before any public attention is drawn to it. Charles nodded, clearly understanding the implications for public relations and family reputation. Camilla, you and your children will return everything today. Margaret will supervise the process to ensure nothing is missed, and this behavior will never happen again. The finality in Charles's voice left no room for argument. Margaret felt a sense of relief that the king was taking the situation seriously and supporting the proper legal procedures, even though it meant confronting his wife publicly. But she also sensed that Camilla was not going to accept this resolution quietly, and that the real confrontation was yet to come. Margaret's prediction proved accurate when, later that afternoon, Camilla attempted to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Instead of quietly returning the items as Charles had ordered, she tried to rally support from other family members and staff members who might sympathize with her position. Word reached Margaret through the castle's informal communication network that Camilla had been approaching various people, telling them a different version of events. According to Camilla's story, she was being persecuted by overzealous security personnel who didn't understand family dynamics. She claimed that Margaret was exceeding her authority and interfering with internal family matters. This attempt at manipulation concerned Margaret deeply. She understood that public perception and family unity were crucial during this transition period, but she also knew that allowing Camilla to reframe the narrative could undermine the legal process and encourage future violations of royal protocol. Margaret decided to speak privately with Sir David Richardson, the Queen's attorney, about the potential complications Camilla's behavior might create. They met in the attorney's temporary office, which had been set up in the castle to handle the immediate legal matters surrounding the Queen's death. I'm concerned that the situation may escalate beyond a simple return of property, Margaret explained. Camilla appears to be building a case for why she should have access to the Queen's belongings, and she's trying to portray our enforcement of the law as personal persecution. Sir David nodded gravely. He had dealt with similar situations in other wealthy families, and understood how quickly property disputes could become bitter personal conflicts. The law is clear, he said firmly. The Queen's will must be followed exactly as written, regardless of anyone's personal feelings or family relationships. He pulled out a thick folder containing the complete details of the Queen's estate planning. Her Majesty spent considerable time ensuring that her wishes were legally bulletproof, precisely because she anticipated potential challenges. She even included specific clauses to prevent anyone from claiming they deserved items based on family relationships or emotional appeals. Margaret felt relieved to have such strong legal backing, but she also understood that legal strength didn't always translate to easy resolution in family situations. The royal family's personal dynamics were complicated by their public roles and the scrutiny they faced from media and the public. Their conversation was interrupted when Commander Wilson knocked on the door. "Excuse me," he said, "but we have a new development. Camilla has refused to return several items, claiming they have special significance to her personally. She's locked herself in her private chambers and is refusing to come out." Margaret and Sir David exchanged concerned glances. This escalation was exactly what they had hoped to avoid. A standoff between the new Queen Consort and the castle's security team would create exactly the kind of scandal that could damage the royals' family's reputation during their most vulnerable time. "What items is she refusing to return?" Sir David asked. Commander Wilson consulted his notes. A diamond and emerald necklace that the Queen wore for her coronation, a set of pearl earrings that belonged to Queen Victoria, and several personal letters that Charles wrote to his mother over the years. The significance of these items made the situation even more serious. These weren't random pieces of jewelry or simple keepsakes. They were historically important artifacts that had been specifically designated in the Queen's will for particular recipients. The letters in particular were private family documents that Camilla had no legal right to possess. Margaret realized that the situation had moved beyond what could be resolved through polite negotiation. Camilla's refusal to comply, with direct orders from both the king and legal authorities, meant that more formal enforcement measures might be necessary. "I need to speak with King Charles immediately," she decided. "This has become a direct challenge to royal authority and legal procedure. It cannot be allowed to continue." They found Charles in his private study, looking overwhelmed by the responsibilities of his new position while simultaneously dealing with grief and family crisis. When they explained Camilla's latest actions, his expression hardened with determination. "This ends now," Charles said firmly. "I will not allow my mother's final wishes to be disrespected, and I will not allow this family to be torn apart by greed and selfishness during our time of mourning." He stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back to address Margaret directly. "I want you to personally ensure that every single item is returned to its proper place. You have my complete authority to take whatever measures are necessary to enforce compliance." Margaret understood the weight of what Charles was asking her to do. He was essentially authorizing her to take action against his own wife if she continued to resist. This level of authority was unprecedented in her career, but the circumstances were equally unprecedented. She made her way to Camilla's private chambers, accompanied by Commander Wilson and 2 additional security officers. This wasn't an arrest situation, but they needed to be prepared for any possibility. Margaret hoped that a show of official authority might convince Camilla to reconsider her position. When they knocked on Camilla's door, there was no immediate response. Margaret could hear voices inside. It sounded like Camilla was on the phone with someone, possibly her children or a legal advisor. After several minutes, Laura opened the door, looking distressed and uncertain. "My mother is very upset," Laura said. "She feels like she's being treated unfairly, and that her position in the family isn't being respected. She just wants to keep a few small things that remind her of the Queen." Margaret looked past Laura into the room, where she could see Camilla sitting at a small table with several jewelry boxes open in front of her. The items Commander Wilson had mentioned were clearly visible, along with what appeared to be additional pieces that hadn't been on the original inventory. "I understand this is an emotional time," Margaret said gently but firmly, "but the law doesn't make exceptions based on emotions or family relationships. These items must be returned immediately, or will be forced to involve outside legal authorities." The mention of outside legal involvement, which could mean police or courts, seemed to get Camilla's attention. She looked up from the jewelry boxes with a mixture of defiance and fear in her eyes. "You wouldn't dare," she said. "The scandal would destroy this family's reputation. Charles would never allow his wife to be publicly humiliated like that." Margaret realized that Camilla was betting that the royal family's concern about public image would protect her from facing real consequences for her actions. It was a calculated gamble that showed just how far she was willing to push the situation. Margaret's response surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Instead of backing down from Camilla's challenge, she stepped forward with absolute resolve and spoke in a voice that carried 2 decades of unwavering service to the crown. "Your Majesty," she said, using the formal address while making it clear that titles didn't exempt anyone from following the law. "You have gravely misunderstood both your position and mine. My loyalty is to the crown, to the law, and to the final wishes of Queen Elizabeth. Those loyalties don't change based on political calculations or concerns about public relations." She gestured to Commander Wilson, who stepped forward with an official document. "This is a formal notice from the royal household and the Queen's legal representatives. You have 30 minutes to return all items belonging to the late Queen's estate. If you refuse, we will contact the Metropolitan Police and the matter will be handled through criminal courts." Camilla's face went white as she realized that Margaret wasn't bluffing. The security chief had called her gamble and was prepared to follow through with legal action, regardless of the potential scandal or family embarrassment it might cause. "You can't be serious," Camilla stammered. "Charles would never allow his wife to be arrested. The damage to the monarchy would be irreparable." Margaret pulled out her phone and showed Camilla a text message she had received just minutes earlier from King Charles himself. The message was brief but clear. "Full authority granted. Proceed as necessary to resolve this matter completely. His Majesty understands that protecting the integrity of the crown sometimes requires difficult decisions," Margaret explained. "The damage to the monarchy comes from allowing laws to be broken, not from enforcing them equally regardless of someone's title or family connections." Laura and Tom, who had been watching the confrontation with growing alarm, finally convinced their mother to face reality. Tom spoke quietly but urgently in Camilla's ear, pointing out that being arrested and charged with theft would end any possibility of her maintaining her position or reputation within the royal family. Reluctantly, Camilla began placing the items back into their original containers. However, Margaret noticed that she was trying to hold back several pieces, palming them discreetly as she appeared to comply with the order. 20 years of security training had taught Margaret to watch for exactly this kind of deceptive behavior. "I need to inspect everything before it's returned," Margaret stated firmly. "Please place all items on the table where they can be properly inventoried." This request triggered another outburst from Camilla. "This is humiliating. I'm being treated like a common criminal by my own security staff. Charles will hear about how badly I've been treated." Margaret remained unmoved by the emotional manipulation. "Your Majesty, you chose to break the law despite multiple opportunities to stop. The consequences of those choices belong to you, not to the people enforcing the legal requirements." At that moment, Princess Anne appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been informed of the ongoing situation and had come to witness its resolution personally. Her presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room, as everyone understood that she represented the old guard of royal tradition and had the authority to speak for the family's values. "Camilla," Anne said with icy politeness, "I think it's time you understood something important about this family. We serve the institution of the monarchy, not the other way around. The crown is bigger than any individual, including you, including me, and including Charles." She walked over to examine the items on the table, picking up the coronation necklace that Camilla had been particularly reluctant to return. This necklace was worn by our mother during the most important day of her reign. It represents 60 years of dedicated service to the British people. The idea that you would try to claim it for your personal collection shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be royal. Margaret watched as Camilla finally seemed to grasp the full magnitude of what she had attempted. The room fell silent except for the sound of jewelry being placed back into official containers and documents being organized for return to the proper authorities. The final inventory took over an hour, with Margaret carefully checking each item against the official estate documentation. She discovered that Camilla had taken far more than initially reported, including several pieces of historical significance that hadn't appeared in the security footage because they had been removed during earlier unauthorized visits. As each item was catalogued and returned to its proper secure location, Margaret felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that she had successfully protected the Queen's final wishes, but sadness that this confrontation had been necessary during what should have been a period of unified family mourning. The immediate aftermath of the incident created ripple effects throughout the royal household. Word of Camilla's expulsion from the Queen's private quarters spread quickly among the staff, though Margaret and her team maintained professional discretion about the specific details. The respect they had earned through their handling of the situation actually strengthened their position within the castle hierarchy. King Charles requested a private meeting with Margaret the following day. When she entered his study, she expected to face criticism or even dismissal for her role in publicly confronting his wife. Instead, Charles stood and offered her his hand in gratitude. "Margaret," he said solemnly, "I want to thank you for your courage and dedication during this difficult situation. I know it couldn't have been easy to challenge a member of the family, but you did exactly what my mother would have wanted you to do." He walked to his desk and retrieved a formal letter bearing the royal seal. "I'm promoting you to Chief of Royal Protection Services, with authority over all security matters involving the royal family's personal properties and estates. Your actions have shown that you understand the difference between serving individuals and serving the crown." Margaret accepted the promotion with humility, understanding that it came with even greater responsibilities. She would now oversee not just physical security, but also the protection of royal traditions, legal procedures, and institutional integrity. The consequences for Camilla extended far beyond the return of the stolen items. Charles made it clear that her access to royal properties would be limited and supervised. She was excluded from participating in any decisions about the Queen's estate distribution, and her public appearances were carefully managed to prevent further embarrassment to the family. More significantly, the incident created lasting damage to Camilla's relationship with other family members. Princess Anne's already cool attitude toward her sister-in-law became openly hostile. Other members of the extended royal family who learned about the incident viewed Camilla with suspicion and distrust that would persist for years. The broader royal household staff, who had initially been uncertain about how to treat the new queen consort, now understood that titles didn't exempt anyone from following established rules and protocols. Margaret's firm enforcement of the law had reinforced the principle that the institution was more important than any individual within it. In the weeks that followed, as the Queen's estate was officially distributed according to her carefully planned will, Margaret often reflected on the importance of her actions. Every item went to its designated recipient: family members, loyal staff, charitable organizations, and museums, exactly as the Queen had wished. The diamond and emerald coronation necklace went to Princess Catherine, as specified in the will. The Victorian pearl earrings were donated to the royal collection, where they would be preserved for historical study. The personal letters between Charles and his mother were returned to him privately, as the Queen had intended. Margaret's role in protecting these wishes became a defining moment in her career and in the modern history of royal household management. She had demonstrated that even in the most delicate family situations, the law and proper procedures must be maintained. The incident also served as a crucial test for King Charles's leadership during his early days on the throne. His support for Margaret's actions, despite the personal cost of confronting his wife, showed the British public and the Commonwealth that he understood his responsibilities as sovereign came before his personal relationships. Years later, Margaret would look back on those difficult days as the moment when she truly understood the weight of her oath to protect the crown. She had sworn to serve not just the person of the monarch, but the institution itself with all its traditions, laws, and sacred trusts. The Queen's belongings were ultimately distributed exactly as she had planned, preserving her legacy and honoring her final wishes. And Margaret Thompson, the royal guard who had refused to let anyone, regardless of their title or family position, interfere with that legacy, had ensured that Queen Elizabeth's memory would be protected with the same dedication she had shown throughout her remarkable reign. In the end, the incident demonstrated a fundamental truth about the British monarchy. It endures not because of the power of individuals, but because of the strength of its institutions and the courage of those who protect them, even when that protection requires difficult and unpopular decisions.